Muchas gracias, Joaquín. Damos paso pues a la primera de las mesas de ponentes, objetivos y oportunidades de la Agenda Territorial Europea 2030 para los territorios de la Unión Europea, la cual está moderada por Margarita Ortega, ex representante del Gobierno de España en asuntos territoriales y materia de paisaje en la Unión Europea, a quien le damos voz para que pueda iniciar la sesión.
Ya, ¿se me oye? Buenos días. Muy breve. Muchas gracias a los organizadores por invitarme, contar conmigo en este seminario. Y para mí es un honor por dos motivos. El primero, porque me emociona volver a tomar contacto con este proceso de introducir la dimensión territorial en las políticas europeas, que se inició hace 20 años y del que yo fui testigo como representante de nuestro país en todas las iniciativas y aquellos trabajos que llevan a cabo. Y el segundo motivo también de orgullo y de honor es porque yo soy miembro de FUNDICOT, que es una asociación que ha venido siempre defendiendo este proceso y es uno de los referentes que existen en este país, precisamente para mantener estas relaciones tan complejas y tan a multinivel, por decirlo de alguna manera, pero con una idea absolutamente clara, que es la que se ha comentado, de introducir ese objetivo de la dimensión del territorial y sobre todo ese objetivo de cohesión territorial que se introduce en los tratados. Bien, dicho esto, se inicia este panel tenemos tres oradores y el primero al que le voy a dar paso es a Kai Böhme, que es un viejo conocido, bueno, viejo, él es joven, yo no, yo le conozco de entonces, que es el founder y director del Spatial Foresight de Alemania, y nos va a hablar del largo y continuo proceso o camino, como él describe, que ha sido la agenda territorial para incorporar esa dimensión territorial en las políticas europeas. Kai, tienes la palabra.
Thank you for the introduction and good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be invited to that panel while I share now my PowerPoint. So now you hopefully see my presentation. So what I would like to use the next 10 to 15 minutes is to think a little bit about the territorial agenda. And as Margarita already said, it has been a long journey. It's not that this is a one time and first time. And really, if we go back, it's 20 years or even a little bit longer, starting with the elaboration of the ISDP, the European Spatial Development Perspective. And then came the first version of the Territorial Agenda in 2007, the second one in 2011, and now we will have the Territorial Agenda 2030, actually, sorry, that's it. And then which will be agreed on Tuesday next week, hopefully. I think what we always need to keep in mind when we talk about these policies, even though we're talking at a European scale, it's an intergovernmental cooperation policy. So it's actually carried forward by the countries, by the EU member states and some neighboring countries, including, for instance, Switzerland and Norway. So it's not a EU as a European Commission policy, but really something that's carried bottom up from the member states. In the run-up to the Territorial Agenda 2030 to be agreed next week, there were not only those policy documents from the past, but there's a lot of work behind that. In particular, the ESPON program has been very supportive with a wide range of research informing the territorial knowledge about Europe, and a particular project run by a dear friend from Barcelona, Andrea Ulliet from MCRIT, was on the territorial reference framework that builds a basis for a lot of the analysis and discussions that led to the new territorial agenda. And basically that builds around three types of challenges. So what you see, and I think a lot of those challenges have been mentioned in the introduction speeches already, Europe faces, the world, but also Europe and its territories face particular challenges when it comes to climate change, to the loss of biodiversity, cultural and landscape, circular economy. So there's a lot of things that we need to address to really make sure we have a future and we're not risking our future with unsustainable developments in the different territories. Then we have a huge number of challenges that are linked to places in Europe drifting apart. And I think we heard already about demographic change that is different in different parts. We heard already about employment, digitalization. All those things at the moment point at increasing disparities in Europe. And you have actually a discourse about a geography of discontent, places that don't matter, which signal that we are more and more as people and as places drifting apart in Europe, in the countries, in the regions. And if we want to have a future, if we want to build on the success, we need to make sure that this is turned around and we are not further accelerating. And therefore also the member states and all the players involved in the territorial agenda agreed on the subtitle as a future for all places. So the territorial agenda really advocates that there is a future for all places, small places, big places, central, peripheral, whatever kind of place you are. And then the most recent and most dominant challenge in the game at the moment is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. And that accelerates a lot of the challenges we have. So it's just kind of putting an additional layer on increasing disparities on there. But I would like to argue that it also gives us an opportunity, because as was mentioned, we now get a substantial EU budget. We have a lot of policies that frame the word of a restart, a recovery. So maybe that also gives us a chance to think kind of what do we want Europe to look like in such a restart? What can that be? And maybe there the territorial agenda can stress a little bit the territorial dimension. And in the territorial agenda, as it will be agreed next week, there are two main objectives. The one is really to advocate a just Europe that offers a future perspective for all places and all people. And the second objective is a green Europe that protects the common livelihood and shapes societal transition towards a sustainable development and economy. And if we look into the Just Europe part, there it's three priorities. One is on a balanced Europe, which emphasizes the need of a polycentric development across Europe, that we make use of the diverse potential that we have in different parts of Europe, and that we really also cooperate on responding to global challenges. And that's the European layer. But then, of course, the territory has also several lower layers, and here the emphasis of the second priority was put on the functional regions, saying it's not just administrative areas, but really the functional region is very important to make sure that we have also there a cohesive and equality between places in a functional region. And the emphasis here is on multi-level governance approaches and the strengthening of cooperation on long-term place-based strategies at local regional level. And the third one under Just Europe is the integration beyond borders. And I think just the COVID example shows how integrated we are, and that we need stable cross-border cooperations and also coordinate different sector policies across national borders. So I think that is the part to ensure that we have a living and working across national borders in Europe. As for the Green Europe, there are also three priorities. The first, focusing on a healthy environment, looking at a better ecological livelihood and climate neutral and resilient towns, cities, and regions. Advocating very much the use of nature-based solutions, the respect of our natural limits and the increase of resilience towards climate change, but also empowering local and regional communities to work with the protection, rehabilitation, and utilization of their potentials in the environmental dimension. The second priority focus on the circular economy, saying that is very, very important. If we move forwards in Europe, we need to have place-based, regional, local industrial symbiosis processes that build up towards circular economies and strategies in the regions, but also are embedded in a global economy. So it's not about dismissing the global dimension. And of course, it links very much to the innovation capacities that we need. And last but not least are sustainable connections. That was a very highly discussed topic. I think there's a general agreement that we need both, and now we see that today again, good internet connections with high-speed fixed and mobile communication access, but we also need the physical transport, and particularly here's a link between the local regional transport lines and the transnational ones. But important, and that is why it ended up under the Green Europe, we need to make sure that both the digital and the physical connectivity is sustainable, so that we have a shift towards more environmentally progressive modes of communication and connectivity. That are basically the priorities which the Territorial Agenda advocates and would like to see taken on board at all the different levels of governance. And I think that's where we then come to the implementation and governance part. And as I said, it's intergovernmental cooperation. So the Territorial Agenda cannot say we write that into any kind of EU treaty. It can only advocate, argue, ask that this is done. And it's really advocating that this is done by all players. So from the local and regional to cross-border, transnational, intra-regional, to member states, neighboring countries in the EU level. So it's not that we can sit here and point at somebody else and saying, well, they should do something, then we do it. But it's really everybody is asked. And it advocates that this is done in a place-based approach, that we look really at the territorial impacts of various sector policies, be it planning, development, transport, environment, you name it, and that we address the dimension of multi-level governance and good governance. The quality of governance is very decisive for territorial development. And of course, the cooperation between territories, that we don't do things in isolation. And what the Territorial Agenda makes very clear is it's not saying you should do something extra. It's not you do an extra project and you apply for extra funding, but it's that everybody should take those things on board within the own regular mandate. So within the activities and policies you're doing anyway, people are kindly asked to take on board those things so that it's more transversal integration. I think if we look back for the last 20 years from the ISCTE in 1999 to today, we see actually that in quite a number of policies, the territorial dimension progressively has been integrated. It's not a one big step, but compare how policies looked like in 1999 and today, and you find many, many more references towards territorial dimensions, towards territorial disparities and sensitivities. So from that side, I'm quite optimistic that we actually manage. And we had, in parallel to the elaboration of the Territorial Agenda, colleagues from EPRC in Glasgow and Blue in Munich, looking at quite a range of different ongoing projects where they say, well, those people didn't know the new Territorial Agenda when they started working, but when we see what they do, they're actually very well doing it already. And they try to see why do they do it and why do they say that is important. And the four main topics are basically there's a strategic territorial focus. So looking into that helps very much getting the projects better, and policy integration and synergies and the cross-cutting issues across different policies that combine support and that allow for synergies are very important. And also innovation and experimentation. So taking it from a territorial perspective, you often needed to rethink a little bit. You needed to innovate your policy development and experiment a little bit. And I think that is in particular now when we move to a post-COVID or living with COVID society, we need probably to dare to experiment and see what really are the good approaches and the good things we want to have. And as the territorial dimension is so strong on the cooperation and multi-level governance part, it helped quite a lot in the governance models and capacities. So there is actually also a benefit for everybody when you look into trying to follow the ideas of the territorial agenda and the previous versions. And again, here they use the same 52 projects they analyzed and simply said, okay, if we say balanced Europe, functional regions, integration beyond borders, healthy environment, circular economy, sustainable connections, those priorities. And they said, okay, at what geographical level did those activities, projects actually work? And as you see here, you see it from on the left, local over the regional, national, cross-border, transnational. So which simply shows that a lot of those things can be applied really at any geographical level. It's not one particular level. You find all the details in a report on the website of the Territorial Agenda, and I will then close with that as well. If you go to that website, www.territorialagenda.eu, you find, as of Tuesday, the final version of the Territorial Agenda, both in a long and a short version. You find information about those 52 example projects and about the 6 pilot projects, which I understand will be presented and discussed in the second panel by colleagues from the ministry in Germany. So from that, I would say I leave it here, and really a lot of information is available on that website. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Kai. Has introducido, ¿se me oye? Has introducido 2 temas que van a ayudarnos a las siguientes intervenciones. La primera es que has señalado esa geografía del descontento que lleva en este momento el territorio, pero el futuro de todos los lugares. Y Fernando Medeiros, el Geography Professor del Instituto Universitario de Lisboa, justamente nos va a ayudar a entender cómo esa dificultad o esas posibilidades de introducir esa dimensión territorial, la territorialización, algo así, de la intervención de ese factor clave en las políticas, en la política de cohesión de la Unión Europea a través del instrumento que nos ha esbozado Kai. Fernando, tienes la palabra.
Thank you, Margarita. Good morning, all of all. I'm trying to put my presentation. Okay. So good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation made by Professor Joaquim Farinos and to make the presentation on this very interesting event and I think very relevant topic of the Territorial Agenda 2030. As you can see from the title of this presentation, I will mainly focus on potential links between, the presented Territorial Agenda 2030 that Kai Boehm presented and the cohesion policy. So as a geographer, I focus on territorial analysis, and I sometimes, many times, notice that this territorial dimension of policies is widely misunderstood, especially by policymakers, but also by some academics. But in essence, let me see if I can put my presentation. Okay. In essence, this territorial dimension should be analyzed not only by the policy strategic goals, which should focus mainly on this idea of territorial development and cohesion, rather than what we normally see, which is economic growth. But also on their potential territorial impacts, not only the impacts on economy, on society, on environment, but everything, and including spatial planning, territorial governance. So territorial impacts is very holistic, very complete. And funding policies should target different territorial levels, as Kai Wen has shown in his presentation very well. So this degree of territorialization of policies depends a lot on a strong territorial intervention strategy, focus on development and cohesion, and also on high levels of expected territorial impacts. If you don't produce territorial impacts that are expected, then this territorialization is not very strong. And also, it should be operationalized in all territorial scales, not only at the local level, but also at the regional, at the national, European, and so on. And as Kai Wen spoke, at cross-border, transnational levels. So this increased territorial policy approaches should touch all this territorial universe, as you can see here. It's quite vast, which I call the territorialicy of policies, which is the process of incorporating a territorial-driven policy design to policies. And here you can see many examples. We not only see the crucial and known policy goals such as territorial development, and with all its dimensions and territorial levels, and also territorial cohesion, but also many other aspects of territoriality, which is the improvement of territorial capital, the promotion of territorial governance processes, and territorial cooperation, not only cross-border, transnational, territorial planning, or which is the Latin term of spatial planning, that is used by our Anglo-Saxon colleagues, and territorial integration, and also the implementation, of course, of territorial impact assessment process at several stages, not only exposed after the policies are implemented, but also during these policies implementation, which is the midterm, and also before they are implemented, the ex-ante territorial impact assessments. So where does EU cohesion policy enters in this territoriality process, which links the implementation with the territorial agenda? Well, as it was recently discussed in the Open Days to 2030 workshop on the Territorial Agenda 2013, this agenda does not have a budget. It doesn't have money. Territorial agenda is an idea, is a strategy, but it doesn't bring money with it. So one possible sources of funding is the cohesion policy. And as it was mentioned by the Portuguese Minister for Territorial Cohesion, there's a predicted 30% of cohesion policy funding post-2020 that are due to be applied to implement these territorial agenda goals, in particularly in the areas of environmental related policies. So this is one possibility to interlink the territorial agenda and the design of the strategies, of the national strategies and regional strategies for each country for applying EU cohesion policy. Indeed, if one relates these three main pillars of the main pillars of cohesion policy that are predicted for post-2020, we can see a sea of possibilities to link these with the territorial universe. You can see possibilities, for instance, the spatial planning that could be financially supported this Connected Europe goal, and the territorial cooperation process can be financed or linked to Europe closer to the citizens' goals. So there is a link here between all these territorial aspects of policies and the main objectives for cohesion policy post-22. But I bring here 5 main ideas, which I developed in a synthetical way. First of all, I propose this idea of favoring the concentration of funding in medium functional regions in less developed territories. One of the conclusions that we can take from the implementation of cohesion policy all across Europe, not only in Portugal and Spain, but in all the countries that I've studied, like Sweden, Norway, and Finland, is that cohesion policy has been crucial to achieve the goal of territorial development. It has improved territorial development process in all regions, but it hasn't helped to achieve territorial cohesion at the national level. So the presented idea is that instead of putting all the money in all regions, in every municipality has its own swimming pool, we should concentrate money, most of the money, the bulk of the money, the bulk of investment in these medium towns in the less developed regions. And here are the example for Iberian Peninsula, which was a suggestion that is made in a paper, and there is other countries that I've studied. Another suggestion is to ring fence innovation funding to promote circular economy, which is predicted in the Territorial Agenda, on renewable energy production. And you can see here again the example of Iberian Peninsula, which is a lot of potentials in the solar energy photovoltaic production, which is still very largely untapped, especially the south of Portugal. Maybe Spain is far more advanced than Portugal on this, but this is not to be done on the countryside. It's mostly to be done on urban areas. Here the potential of city of Lisbon in the capacity to produce photovoltaic or solar energy in so many areas. So this is another example of where this money should be used of cohesion policy to implement the territorial agenda goals. Another example is to promoting cross-border integration by the implementation of cross-border planning. Yes, the territorial agenda, as Kai Böhme expressed the idea and the goal to promote this cross-border integration. But I think this should be a little step further, which going from cross-border integration to cross-border planning strategies. And here's another example that you can see in Iberian Peninsula, where you already have a lot of transnational cooperation, cross-border cooperation entities like GTCs and rural regions that are implemented in also rural cities. That could be the entities that could boost these cross-border planning processes to achieve the goals of territorial cohesion. So the fourth, also another example here, I just show that these cross-border planning strategies should not cover, the regional areas, but it should be concentrated on the border. So you need to delimit well where is the cross-border area to implement these strategies, so that they actually make these positive impacts for the border region and not for the rest of the regions. Another aspect that Kai Böhme spoke, that sustainable integration, but at the transnational level, it's also very important to focus on these transnational aspects of planning. For instance, it's hard to plan a functional high-speed railway system in Portugal, which we don't have yet, without taking into consideration the one that is already implemented in Spain. This is a fundamental aspect of territorial development. And to help to achieve territorial cohesion in many regions is to have this transnational perspective of investment. I could speak a lot about this, but there is no time, so we move for the last one, which is also something that is already being implemented here in Europe. There is around 700 sustainable urban integrated development strategies being implemented at the moment in Europe. 108 around in Portugal alone. So many are still being implemented, but the first evaluations have seen positive impacts of these sustainable urban integrated development strategies. And I present here the example of Barcelona. They have seen very positive impacts in the renovation of many deprived neighborhoods in these cities where they are being implemented, not only in physical renovation, but also in socioeconomic and environmental rehabilitation. And so I would say that this is a very good example when a lot of money should be concentrated to achieve these goals of the territorial cohesion at the urban level. However, just like it happened with these deprived urban neighborhoods, you can always contribute in many cases to mitigate urban development and planning needs, as there is a need to increase the channeling of funding to these strategies. So I leave you here with 5 arenas in which I believe the territorial agenda could be implemented through the investments, through the money that is allocated to cohesion policy in all countries. And I thank you for watching my presentation.
Obrigado. Obrigado, Fernando, por esa interesante análisis de los efectos de esa consideración del territorio en los años que llevamos aplicándolo a través de la política de cohesión para abordar el nuevo periodo y esas 5 interesantes ideas de las que espero luego en el debate podrás, digamos, ampliar algunos de esos enfoques. Gracias. Y ahora me gustaría darle ya la palabra a Angelika Poth-Moegele, que es la directora ejecutiva de los asuntos europeos del Consejo de Municipios y Regiones de Europa.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. Sorry, I first need to turn off the translation. Otherwise, I think there's a problem. Yes, okay. Yes, thank you very much for the invitation, and it was really a great pleasure to accept the invitation, and it was interesting to listen to the previous speakers. In particular, I'm very happy to hear what the representatives of the Spanish government or administration were saying, because it really goes into the direction that we want the territorial agenda to be applied and to be understood. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I would be interested to receive the PowerPoint presentations of the previous speakers because there was so much information in it. It would be interesting to have a look at them again. My presentation covers 3 points. The first one is a few reflections on the territorial agenda. And then I would like to address the opportunities, but in the third part, also the challenges that we see. But before I start with these points, I would like to shortly present the Council of European Municipalities and Regions, what we are. It's the European umbrella organization that represents national associations of local and regional governments. So in Spain, our member is the FEMP, the Federation of Municipalities and Provinces. We are we participate in this intergovernmental work on territorial cohesion, and this group has been involved in the preparation of the Territorial Agenda of 2030, and already in the previous one on the Territorial Agenda 2020. We, and myself as well, we were involved, and I very much appreciate the work in particular of Kai Böhme and his colleagues. It was really a very interesting way to jointly address these questions, and it was a very enriching experience. I was very happy, or we are very happy, that the principles that are laid down in the territorial agenda, we can fully share these and we should fully support them. In particular, the concept of polycentric development and the focus on small and medium-sized towns. This is definitely something that that our members are supporting, because, as you know, the majority of local governments in Europe is not the big cities, is not the metropolitan cities, but it's the smaller and medium-sized towns. So looking at the Territorial Agenda 2030, what is really very important for us is that it clearly develops the concept and the idea that in Europe there is a future for all places, and this relates also to the no place should be left behind, how we understand also the 2030 agenda from the United Nations and the Sustainable Development Goals, which for us at the CEMR provide the framework for our work. It's extremely important to follow this perspective. No place should be left behind. Therefore, we are strongly convinced that the Territorial Agenda 2030 is an extremely relevant policy framework that really covers many aspects that should be taken into account in the development and in the implementation of future policies. And I was very happy that the previous speaker now referred also to the territorial impact assessment. I have the pleasure to participate in the platform Fit for Future, which had its first meeting yesterday, where at the European Union in level, the task is going to be to assess the relevance of EU policies. And my point was indeed to say it's not just an ex post evaluation. It's in particular necessary to have this ex ante and during the implementation phase to monitor the impact on the territories. And I was very happy, Professor Medeiros, that you mentioned it in your intervention. And I hope that we will be successful with this. I got some support from other participants, but as I said, the first meeting took place yesterday. I hope that we can continue working in this direction. So I would say I refer also to the previous speakers from Spain. The territorial agenda is extremely important at this stage, where the preparation of the next policy cycle in the EU is going to, well, has already started, in particular as far as cohesion policy and the recovery plan and resilience facility is concerned. And we really hope that member states, national administrations will take the inspiration from the territorial agenda for the development of the national plans. What is important for us, and I think Kai Böhme in his presentation highlighted this as well, 3 points that are important that are mentioned in the territorial agenda, in particular the recognition that we need better understand and adequately address the territorial impact of sectoral policies. This is extremely interesting and extremely important that this is better taken into account. Second point is, of course, the vertical and the horizontal coordination and collaboration. Kai also referred to the impact of COVID-19 on the territories, and OECD in its report that they prepared on this issue, the territorial impact of COVID, one of the key findings is also that it's relevant to that all levels of government and actors at all levels collaborate in order to tackle the problems and the crisis. So it's also important, as has been mentioned, I think also by Professor Medeiros, that the diverse policy sectors and societal groups need to be associated and included in this process. And last point, which I think is extremely important, in particular talking about the local and regional level, what is necessary and what we've seen also from the cohesion policy, what is necessary is capacity building at the subnational level, the need for exchange of knowledge and experience, good practices, networking, innovation, as you've mentioned, and Kai Böhme mentioned this report that is going to be published in the context of the informal ministerial meeting next week, which has these concrete pilot projects or concrete projects. I think this should be really a source of inspiration for others. Looking at the opportunities for local and regional governments, my second point, it's really very important, and I hope that our president, who will be speaking at the ministerial meeting next week, will stress this element, really call the central governments to apply the recommendations of the Territorial Agenda 2030 in this important moment of the preparation of the programs and the projects for the relevant EU initiatives. At the moment when we consult our colleagues, our member associations, but also the Committee of the Regions is doing that, we are not too optimistic that this is really happening. So on the contrary, many countries, many national administrations do this in isolation or not necessarily in consultation with the regional and the local government level. And I was pleased to hear that in Spain, the attitude or the approach is different. It's really very important for the cohesion policy, also for rural development. We know that rural development is in the responsibility of, or is a part of the European agricultural policy, but it should not be ignored, and it should really get more attention. And there is a currently a consultation, and the Commission is going to prepare a report on the future of rural areas. So this really needs to be looked at in combination with the urban development. And of course, as I said already, the national recovery plans currently under preparation. It would be extremely important to take the territorial agenda's recommendations on board. To mention also, of course, the European Green Deal and also the European semester, which are closely linked to the cohesion policy and the recovery plans. Another thing, and it's not just to please you as researchers, but I'm seriously and dedicated and convinced that researchers, academics, and practitioners, local politicians, but also administrators should talk to each other and should learn from each other's experience. And our collaboration or our experience, for example, with ESPON is extremely useful and very much appreciated, because it really helps the the decision makers at the political level to see the big picture and to understand what's happening in the territories. So I'm a strong believer and a strong advocate for an exchange between the researchers and the practitioners. And again, also as a result of that, of course, to exchange knowledge and transfer the knowledge. It's not sufficient to have a list or an overview of 32 concrete projects, but what is important is really also to see how can other regions learn from that experience. And we are also participating in the URBACT program, which is particularly looking at exchange of knowledge and experience of the urban level. And I think something similar could probably be launched also in general for territorial development. I think would be extremely interesting and useful to have something like that as well. My last point is the challenges. I'm really concerned, or we are really concerned, whether the territorial agenda will be taken serious in central government administrations and in the relevant ministries. That's also based, of course, on the experience of the previous territorial agenda 2020. Also a very useful, very interesting document, but hardly anybody knew about it or made use of it. So I think it's extremely important that next week, when the ministers meet and adopt the agenda, that they also commit to take it serious and to promote it towards their colleagues in the other ministries. As Professor Medeiros already mentioned, and I'm quite happy about that, also very important is, of course, the cross-border dimension. Cross-border, transnational, international, interregional cooperation, looking at functional areas, going beyond legal and administrative borders, is extremely important, but extremely difficult. We know from experience that still in many regions or in many local and regional governments, there is this attitude only to think about one's own territory or one's own unit. It's extremely difficult to cross these barriers and to cross these frontiers and to collaborate. Also already mentioned by Professor Medeiros, of course, the link between urban policies, the new Leipzig Charter, and the territorial agenda. The one cannot be implemented or taken into practice without the other. So it's really, really important. And another challenge is, of course, the capacity at the local level to participate and to contribute to the implementation of the territorial agenda. I hope that we at the CMR can contribute by mobilizing our members, by stimulating the knowledge about that we can contribute to that. But I hope that it will be a joint effort of all the relevant actors at all levels, so central government, regional government, and the local level. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Angelika. Creo que has ya apuntado en tu intervención los temas más interesantes para sacar sentido a este seminario, como es la participación desde las escalas locales y regionales para implementar en el territorio estas nuevas orientaciones que proporciona la agenda. Me gustaría agradeceros estas tres intervenciones y plantear tres grandes ideas para que pudierais responder. Creo que ha habido en general, una orientación de la situación que pese, o gracias tal vez a los efectos de la pandemia, sin embargo, esta situación crítica se percibe como con optimismo de cara a reforzar la idea de lo que es el enfoque territorial, que es advertir la situación crítica, pero también abrir oportunidades a todos y cada uno de los territorios. Creo que ese es un tema que pone en valor el papel que tiene que hacer la agenda para ayudar. No es efectivamente un tratado, pero sí tiene una vocación de servir de orientación al nuevo periodo que se abre de fondos y además también a los fondos de reconversión. El segundo sería ese enfoque. Yo creo que ha habido muchas ideas muy interesantes, sobre todo que todo el mundo tiene que colaborar, que hay que hacer algo, es decir, no basta, no viene de arriba, es decir, hay una participación enormemente potente en este caso y Angelika es, digamos, la que ha defendido o defiende esa óptica desde esos poderes locales y regionales que están encima del territorio. Y por último, se ha enfocado, se ha hablado de que hay que hacerlo de otra manera, que hay que reforzar determinados aspectos que son claves a la hora de esta necesidad de que esta agenda sirva en efecto de orientación. Y yo creo que esos tres aspectos, esa necesidad de hacer algo y hacerlo para el futuro, es lo que me gustaría que ahora vosotros reforzarais de cara a sacar digamos, unas conclusiones que ayudaran a resumir vuestras aportaciones. Gracias. Ese esfuerzo extra para vincular la idea, el concepto de la dimensión territorial que Fernando Medeiros ha explicado, digamos, cuáles han sido sus efectos y en qué debería traducirse. Yo creo que esa es una idea interesante, pero sobre todo, ¿cuáles serían en este momento esos puntos que Angelika nos ha reforzado en su intervención, que hace falta, primero la difusión, el compromiso y la responsabilidad a la hora de abordar esos planes que ya no son planes digamos, estándar, tienen que ser claramente enfocados a esos territorios problemas que el análisis de la política de cohesión ha advertido. Es decir, esos espacios más débiles o más frágiles, o esas relaciones más frágiles y más débiles que se han visto de la aplicación quizás de esas políticas, a lo mejor las sectoriales, que siguen sin comprender o siguen dificultando esa versión transversal. Es decir, es un desafío absolutamente novedoso en donde interviene la palabra gobernanza, que hay que darle, esa multinivel, que hay que darle verdaderamente sentido. No sé si es demasiado abstracto, pero simplemente es reforzar esas ideas. Angelika.
Kai raised his hand. I would give him first the floor so that I can think a bit more about your question.
Okay, then I jump in. Thank you very much. I think I would like to echo a few things Angelika said and well, has been advocating over the years as I know her. It's really also building the capacity at all levels of governance. So it's not only capacities at central or European levels, but in big cities, in small cities, in rural places, so that we really get the capacity to work with things, because cooperating between places, cooperating across sectors, across levels of governance is not that easy as it is said. It's quite a difficult task and it requires a lot of capacity, not necessarily knowledge, but kind of how to handle it, how to work with that. I think if we really want to be successful with the territorial agenda and with territorial development in general, we need to think much more about that. So that is something I would really stress, that we make sure it's not only the big metropolitan areas being able to capture those things, but all places, as kind of a future for all places needs to address all. And for me, that then of course also links to communication. And if I think back to the last version of the territorial agenda, there was very little communication afterwards. So if nobody feels in charge to tell the world about it, the world will not know. So from that side, I also hope that after the ministerial meetings next week, we have the ministers in the different countries forwarding that information to their colleagues in the other ministries, to their regions and cities and municipalities. I'm a little bit optimistic here as it looks like at the moment the European Commission might step in and actually in spring next year do a translation of the territorial agenda into all official languages, which probably helps the communication beyond those that easily deal with English. So I think we need to make an effort, but I'm optimistic that we have a better starting position than what was the situation in 2011. And last but not least, and then I close, I would also say that the universities have to play a role, not just in the immediate communication and capacity building, but if we get the territorial agenda on the curricula for geography, for planning, for territorial development programs, so that future generations are aware of that. And I think that was my immediate reaction here.
Sí. ¿Tienes algo que decir, Ángela? Porque ahora vamos a preguntar, os voy a transmitir las preguntas que están haciéndonos a través del chat, pero sí me gustaría que respondieras, Angelika, y ahora ya comento.
Yes, I would echo what Kai was saying, but I would go a bit further. I would like to echo communication is key, the role of universities, but I think what we also now see with COVID, the relevance of evidence-based arguments to convince the decision makers. What we experience, or what I experience from my collaboration, I've been working at university myself, is of course the language, how to express complex issues in a language that the politicians understand, and also the public administration concerned. Sometimes I'm afraid we don't speak the same language. Universities or academics have the tendency to be very abstract, and I'm not complaining, I fully understand that, but in order to bring the message across, it's really important to have a language, to use words which are easily to be understood by those who should listen to the academics. And it's really about a change in the attitude, and we see it from integrated urban development, for example, how difficult it is to cross from department to department. So really to mobilize people to talk to each other, to develop something together, not to continue in this sectoral approach. It's extremely challenging, and the same happens in the ministries, as we all know. one ministry in charge is not, let's say, the finance ministry or the economic ministry. If they are in the lead, they have difficulties to accept that others have a say on the distribution of the money, or so. It's, and I think the importance would really be the political leadership. If there is a clear sense from the top to say, this is how we want to do it, this is how we are going to do it, then there is a willingness and hopefully also some readiness to go in this direction. So that's why, looking at the draft conclusions for next week's ministerial meeting, it's still a bit vague. So it recommends, it proposes, etc. But what we really would need, that it comes out from the area of the ministers in charge of territorial development, and this is not the most important, as we know, but it goes really to the other ministries, and all ministers in an ideal world would accept it and say, yes, this is how we want to do it, because we believe this is a good way to proceed. And here I think this is the risk, that if it stays like that, then it will not go further than the last territorial agenda, and that would be a lost opportunity. So I really think we need to see how we can mobilize politicians at all levels to say, yes, this is the way how we should go, and we support, and this is how we are going to apply it. Hopefully, maybe in Spain, you have the opportunity to get the government in this direction, and then to serve as a good example, and probably also in Portugal, because your prime minister used to be the mayor of Lisbon. So I hope he has an understanding of the importance of this. So if we get some support from a number of countries, hopefully others will follow. And of course, I have the hope that the German government would be in the forefront as well.
Gracias. Gracias, Angelika. Me alegra que incidáis en este tema, porque me he recogido de las cuestiones que han planteado las personas a través del chat esa misma idea. Es decir, hay todavía una distancia entre las virtudes, el interés, el contenido de esa agenda, que se percibe de una manera todavía abstracta, por las dificultades de que las administraciones entiendan ese nuevo papel en unas circunstancias diferentes, que obliga esa gobernanza transversal multinivel, que rompe de alguna forma con los sistemas convencionales y protocolarios, sobre todo de las políticas sectoriales. Es decir, se introduce unos factores muy innovadores que son difíciles todavía de encajar, y por tanto es ahí donde se ve la mayor dificultad que pueda asegurar el éxito. No obstante, el mensaje creo que sigue calando. De hecho, que se perfile como una política, la política de cohesión, como asegurar o tener como objetivo el ofrecer que todos los territorios tengan su futuro, ya es alentador, y sobre todo entendiendo que precisamente las dificultades de esas partes del territorio son las que merecen de alguna manera una mirada mucho más intensa para lograr ese equilibrio que se pretende, en definitiva. Me gustaría que Fernando digamos, nos ampliara esos 5 motivos, esas 5 ideas que parece que que pueden responder o ayudar precisamente a estas dudas que nos están preguntando. Fernando.
Thank you, Margarita. Well, just before I speak about that, I actually think that this proposed Territorial Agenda 2030 actually thought about to improve this communication, to pass the message to politicians, because it looks like the strategy was designed in a way that is more simple than the previous ones. And I know that the idea was exactly to pass the message in a better way, in a better manner than the previous ones did. And I think this is a positive thing in this new Territorial Agenda 2030. We need to thank the work of Böhme on this, because the message is very simple for everybody to understand, I think. When it comes to these, to make it more detailed, these 5 proposals that I propose to link the cohesion policy with the territorial agenda, there is not that much to detail, but the idea is to use the money in a smarter way, because I've been evaluating cohesion policy since the first program, since the early 1990s in Portugal. And the first periods of programming period, there is a lot of money, especially in Portugal. I think also I've studied in detail the implementation of cohesion policy in Spain also. The first programming periods, there's a lot of money going to feed many private interests and not the interests of the public. And these have changed a long time because the Commission started to see this and started to impose better regulations, more regulations. It made the cohesion policy more bureaucratic. But in the end, if we don't have a strategy to destine the money of cohesion policy into the in the right manner, then the impacts are always going to be the same. They're going to be positive for development in certain regions, but not for all regions. And what I've seen based on all this experience is that the implementation of cohesion policy in the end always favor the most developed regions. The money goes always, and this is not just the case of Portugal, in Spain, because I've studied in detail Sweden, and I studied in detail Norway is not part of the EU, but they receive a lot of money, not from the EU, but they are implicated in territorial cooperation programs. So I've studied also Norway in detail. And in the end, the regions, the rich regions, which are the metropolitan areas, end up finding always ways to receive more money. For instance, if Lisbon University cannot get money because it is in a competitiveness area, it links with the universities in less developed regions, like in Évora and Alentejo and other areas, and ends up get more money than those regions. And it's not only done in Portugal, it's done in Spain, in many other parts. There's a lot of schemes. Because the capital, the human capital is usually in the big cities. And those are where you have persons that have the knowledge to capture these very difficult money from the Commission, because it's so bureaucratic that you need to have this administrative capacity, this human capacity, and this knowledge to apply for these projects. So in the end, these less developed regions, they always lose when compared to the lower developed regions. Hence this first idea of favoring the concentration of funding on the medium cities of less developed regions. Why? Because it's on the medium cities that you have the universities, that you have the administrative capacity. And if you distribute all this money like we have been doing in the past years for all municipalities, for everybody to have this little piece, it ends up not to have the impacts that we expect. And the idea is that if you concentrate this money on these medium cities that are already the development anchors of these less developed regions, you could promote these spillovers all around the region, and everybody benefits better from that. It's a concept. It should need to be applied to see if it really works or not. I think it would. This is one of the first ones. Then, I came from a country which has developed a lot in terms of investing in renewable energies, but still, Portugal is still largely dependent, and like many other countries, in the importation of fossil fuels. And only in a few days during the year, all the electricity that we use, we produce via renewable energy, which is usually a few days in the winter, where it's a lot of rain and a lot of wind. We already have a lot of, Portugal, a lot of wind capacity, but only a few days. I see no reason why we're not fully independent in energy production, electricity, of course, in Europe. We don't need to import that much energy if we are smart and we invest in exploring this renewable energy potential, because in Portugal and Spain, we have the capacity to be fully independent in energy production via the sun. We have this capacity. It's not done, should be done in the fields, but on the cities. So this is the second idea, which is related to this circular economy that Kai Böhme spoke about in the strategy of cohesion policy. Then it's the transnational cooperation, which is a very interesting domain of research, and the cross-border cooperation. You know, one of the things that we've seen in this with this COVID process is that it was not very smart that we closed the borders. I think that's one of the conclusions that I've taken all these studies. You know, cross-border cooperation is fundamental to territorial development, because these open of the borders that have been occurred since the 1990s in Europe, especially here in Iberian Peninsula, has created these interdependencies that are very difficult now to eliminate by shunting the border. And I think this is one idea that should be better explored in territorial agenda, is that they speak about integration. I think the next step is planning. And if we want to make this territorial agenda more formal, I think we should go to force countries to have cross-border planning, transnational planning, because I give you an example of Portugal. Portugal didn't have any spatial planning documents at the municipality level. Before they were mandatory to do this to receive the fundings. Municipalities in the 1990s, if they didn't have the municipal spatial plan, they didn't receive any funding. All of a sudden, everybody started to have municipal plans in Portugal. So they were forced to do it. And this is something that the territorial agenda should force, to have these cross-border plannings, these transnational plannings, to kind of force from a legal point of view, the regions to cooperate, which is a difficult thing, like Angelika said, it is. But you know, if you force them to receive the money, because if you don't do this, you don't receive the money, they'll start doing it. Then, you know, the transnational planning I already spoke about. And finally, of course, Angelika was very targeted, and this is our area on the importance of reinforcing these integrated development strategies, which are, as Angelika said very well, it's very difficult to do. But if there is money, and this is one of the lessons from cohesion policy, if there is money, they will do it. They will do it, because if there is money, you put everybody on the table, and this is how interact cross-border cooperation, where there are people from many countries, from many regions. If they don't achieve an agreement, they don't receive their part of the money. So they will do it if there is money. So if you force this a little bit more, and that is something that I'd like to see from territorial agenda, to kind of force countries to make mandatory for them to implement cross-border planning, transnational planning, integrated urban planning, they will end up finding an agreement platform, because it's the only way they can receive the funds.
Obrigada. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, Fernando. Dos anotaciones. Creo que justamente las áreas fronterizas son, a mi juicio, las que más se han movido, precisamente, más han respondido a esa necesidad de cooperación. Es decir, ha sido un efecto, uno de los mayores efectos que se pueden comprobar, pese a que necesitan todavía unas oportunidades compartidas, que es donde yo creo que está el problema, ¿no? La pregunta recurrente, ya para concluir, es que sigue, digamos, la esperanza sigue pendiente de que las administraciones demuestren esa inteligencia, esa capacidad de respuesta para responder a esos nuevos desafíos. Ya la palabra planificación sería difícil, porque eso es un compromiso, pero sí que no responda a, digamos, ideas o respuestas, digamos, políticamente muy rápidas, a ocurrencias, por decirlo de alguna manera, sino que respondan a un hilo conductor, a algo que dé una garantía de futuro. Y para ello yo creo que al menos en nuestro país, la Federación de Municipios y Provincias, que ha mencionado Angelika, el fortalecimiento de las mesas entre las regiones para trabajar, las mesas regionales para trabajar en las diferentes políticas, deben ser los lugares donde debe penetrar la idea que ofrece la agenda, y sobre todo de cara a que esos planes que ha planteado Kay también, que deben ser formalizadas, estas estrategias a formalizar, respondan precisamente a objetivos consensuados y transparentes. Creo que, no sé si tenéis alguna palabra última. Sencillamente yo me gustaría agradecer vivamente el placer de haberos escuchado, de vuestro optimismo, de vuestra ilusión, de vuestras advertencias que puedan ayudar precisamente a conformar este nuevo periodo que se abre y al cual no podemos fallar. Gracias. No obstante, me gustaría, si queréis dar alguna última comentario, Angelika o Kai. Kai. Okay. Gracias a todos y retomamos el segundo panel, que pasa ya a ideas ya un poquito más concretas, y muchas gracias de nuevo. Gracias a todos.